Hey, what's up guys? It's Matt with the Movement System. In this video, we're gonna break down why your plyometric training isn't working and what you need to do to fix it. I've spent the last 10 years training thousands of athletes ranging from youth to NFL and NBA athletes and precisely measuring the results. And one of the biggest things that I've learned is that most plyometric training today has become way too clean, way too segmented, and in a lot of cases, way too far removed from what plyometrics were originally designed to do. Because when most coaches think about plyometrics, they think about something like 3 sets of 10 box jumps, and then maybe progressing to drop freezes to teach landing mechanics, and then eventually when the athlete is ready, moving into full depth jumps. And that staged model sounds logical, and it's what you see in some personal training certifications and textbooks. But the problem is that this approach breaks plyometrics into pieces that don't actually train the full stretch shortening cycle for long enough to create the adaptations that we're after. And the way that most people were taught to think about plyometrics leads to them being ineffective and not producing results. So in this video, I want to cover 3 big ideas. First is what plyometrics were originally intended to train. Second is why a lot of modern progressions may actually miss the point. And then third is how to program plyometrics so that athletes will actually develop the qualities that we care about, like tendon capacity, stiffness, rhythm, coordination, and reactivity, and the ability to absorb and produce force. By the end of the video, you'll see where a lot of modern misconceptions about plyometric training comes from and how to actually train plyometrics properly for best results. Let's go ahead and dive into it. All right, let's start with the basic concept. Plyometrics are not just jump training. When we think of plyometrics as just jumping, we can often end up simplifying down to basic box jumps, which actually isn't even a plyometric at all. Alternatively, we can end up overcomplicating training with random, unique variations of multi-directional plate hops and jumping drills that look cool, but don't actually involve enough momentum change to create any real adaptations. Here's the truth. The central quality that we're trying to train with plyometrics is the stretch shortening cycle. That means the athlete rapidly absorbs force eccentrically, transitions through a short amortization phase, and then expresses force concentrically. In simple terms, fast stretch, quick transition, and then rebound. That's characteristic of a true plyometric. And this is what you see not just in depth jumps, but in sprinting, cutting, jumping, bounding, and other sport movements. The foot hits the ground, the tendon and muscle tendon unit absorb energy, the nervous system coordinates preactivation and stiffness, and the athlete gets off the ground quickly, expressing high levels of force. So plyometrics don't just teach the athlete to jump, they teach the athlete's body to behave like a spring. And that's where a lot of modern plyometric training has gone wrong. And this is why I think we should learn from the old school approach to plyometric training from coaches like Yuri Verkhoshansky, the inventor of plyometrics. He invented plyometrics in the 1960s. He did not think of it in phases of isolated jumping and then isolated landing mechanics. His books didn't have charts like this. Instead, he was thinking about developing the athlete's ability to use the stretch shortening cycle as a trainable system. That would include repeated jumps, bounds, and low height reactive jumps where the athlete was coached to maintain rhythm, elasticity, and coordination over multiple contacts. And these were done initially not for max height or distance, but with the emphasis on remaining smooth and rhythmic. One specific example is using repeated jumps on and off of a relatively low box around 12 inches with the goal of maintaining quick elastic rebound. And this wasn't performed for 3 sets of 10, rather the set ended when the athlete lost elasticity. Over the time, the athlete would build up to doing 20, 30, or 40 consecutive reps with an exercise like this. Now this isn't to say that every athlete should start with this exact exercise. The important part is the concept. The athlete is not jumping once, landing, and then stepping down from the box. They're actually learning to repeatedly absorb and produce force. They're learning rhythm. They're learning how to create vertical stiffness through their full system. They're learning how to stay smooth and elastic, and they're teaching their body to behave like a spring. And that's very different from doing a box jump and then stepping down, or just doing a drop jump and sticking the landing. One approach trains the athlete to be like a spring, the other trains little pieces of it and doesn't really put it all together. Both can have a place, but they're not the same. Now, the modern approach to plyometric training often uses a staged progression. For example, phase 1 box jump, phase 2 drop freezes, and then phase 3, true plyometrics like depth jumps. And that's what we see from Turner and Jeffries' 2010, for example. On paper, this seems reasonable, and there's value to teaching athletes how to land, how to control their joints, and how to absorb force. But here's the issue. If an athlete spends 4 weeks only doing box jumps, then 4 weeks only doing drop jumps, and then maybe only gets to true reactive plyometrics at the very end of the training block, they may never train the full stretch shortening cycle long enough to actually see any beneficial adaptation. And that's a major problem because the adaptations that we want from plyometric training take time. Improving muscle preactivation patterns, for example, takes about 6 weeks of consistent plyometric training that involves anticipating ground contact and reacting to produce force quickly. If you look at this graph, you can see how 6 weeks of reactive training like depth jumps, bounds, hops, and other reactive jumps helps athletes activate their muscles sooner, even before the point of ground contact. This only happens though if we're training the full stretch shortening cycle. So training the full stretch shortening cycle consistently is what helps athletes go from over here activating their muscles slowly after they hit the ground to over here knowing how to pre-activate their muscles before they hit the ground so they can rebound faster and jump higher. Again, so the body can act like a spring. You won't get that from just doing box jumps or drop freezes because you're not training the full system to learn to anticipate ground forces and organize itself to react and produce force quickly. Another important adaptation from plyometric training is reduced neuromuscular inhibition. Inhibition is when your brain is hitting the brakes. A lot of athletes that I've worked with have the feeling that they should be able to jump higher, but their brain is sort of hitting the brakes and slowing them down. And that is real and measurable. We've known since Kyra Lane et al. 1991 that reducing this inhibition takes 4 months or more of consistent plyometric training. So to loop this back to the title of the video, if you feel like your plyometric training isn't working, it may be because you're not training the full stretch shortening cycle long enough to reduce inhibition. And if you're using a staged model or thinking about blocks of plyometric training with different goals, this is probably the case. Now, to specifically work on reducing inhibition so your brain isn't hitting the brakes, I like using some yielding movements like these deep split squat jumps or these deep squat oscillatory type jumps with a light med ball to help work through full range of motion. I found this to be particularly useful for clients late stage post-op ACL or even with a history of ankle sprains who may have some lingering inhibition and need to learn to absorb force through the full range of knee flexion. The real key here though is time, having a consistent dose of plyometrics each week for 4 to 6 months. And that doesn't have to be a lot. Really just 10 minutes 2 or 3 times a week is a good target, ideally hitting a couple different movement patterns. For example, 1 or 2 vertical exercises like split jumps, squat jumps, tuck jumps, or counter movement jumps. Then 1 or 2 locomotive exercises, basically going forward, typically 10 to 20 yards. For example, hurdle jumps, bounding, single leg hop, or any other plyo that you can do kind of forward or backward. And then maybe a lateral variation like a skater jump, a lateral skip, or a lateral single leg hop. Of course, you can scale up or down the intensity of the exercises based on what you or your athlete can actually handle. Okay, and the last big physiological adaptation that I wanted to cover was tendon adaptation. And it takes about 3 months for your tendons to adapt to plyometric training. And importantly, this will also detrain if you stop training plyometrics. So if you only do full reactive plyometrics for a few weeks and then you move into other blocks of training, you probably are not giving the athlete exposure to plyometrics long enough to get these adaptations. And this is why I suggest that to get the most out of plyometric training, we need to ditch the model of thinking of plyometrics in phases and think more about how to get a consistent plyometric exposure to our athletes throughout the year. Now I know we've been diving deep into the specific physiological adaptations like preactivation, neuromuscular inhibition, and tendon stiffness, and the time course of those adaptations. And that's because those are all the physiological changes in the body that underpin the measurable improvements in performance that I've seen with my athletes in the gym, like jump height or single leg jump height or improved reactive strength index. I know a lot of videos just focus on do this exercise to improve your jump height, but I think that going one layer deeper helps you understand why, so that way you can structure your training more effectively and therefore make better long-term progress. And if you do appreciate all the work that goes into making these videos, do me a quick favor and hit the like button and subscribe so that way you don't miss any future videos. I'll also leave a link in the description to our free Plyometrics Masterclass. It's a 1-hour deep dive into plyometric training, and if you're enjoying this video, then you'll definitely enjoy that one. Okay, so now that we have all the foundational scientific knowledge, let's move on to the last section on how to program and coach plyometrics to get the best results. Step 1, find an entry point. We've talked about why it's beneficial to train the full stretch shortening cycle versus isolating out specific phases, but how do you actually do that? Well, the main way is to simply scale up or down the intensity of an exercise. And you can do that with any exercise that you choose. Take a bound, for example. Yes, you can certainly do a maximal bound with really big thigh separation, a strong front knee drive, and full explosive intent. But you do have to build up to it, especially with clients who are untrained or just starting plyometrics. One way to do that is just with the effort that you're coaching. Coaching, for example, I want you to give 50% effort and focus on being smooth. Do that for a week and then build up to 60% and 70% over time. That way you're still training the full stretch shortening cycle. The athlete is learning to anticipate ground contact, coordinate muscle actions, and build tendon stiffness, but they're also stepping into it at a level that they can handle without injury and gradually building up. You can also use skipping as a way to build up to full bounding. There are dozens of different skip variations that you can use and coach at progressive levels of effort. So a beginner program may include low-level pogo hops or even jump rope, lateral line hops, lateral jump and stick landings, skipping variations, and other smooth rhythmic bounding motions building up week by week. These drills still train the spring-like quality that we're trying to build. They still involve repeated ground contacts, but the intensity is low enough that they can build capacity, and over time you can build up to higher and higher intensity. We're not avoiding the stretch shortening cycle and then introducing it later. We're exposing the athlete to it early at an appropriate intensity. Now let's look at what an advanced athlete's training session might look like. They may be working split pogos for maximal height, for example, 2 sets of 25 reps. They may do bounding for max distance for 2 sets of 15 to 20 yards. They can handle more intensive single leg work, so we can do single leg hopping for max height for 2 sets of 10, and then even depth jumps for 3 sets of 5. And then lastly into hurdle jumps for 3 sets of 6. So with an advanced plyo program like this, we would expect to see athletes learning to improve more advanced aspects of performance like projection, creating bigger shapes, for example, seeing more thigh separation and stronger knee drive on bounds, seeing really punchy contacts into the ground with pogos or sprinting, and seeing good postural control with multi-directional work. Okay, the last thing that I want to mention is that measuring your outputs like jump height, ground contact, or reactive strength index can really help you guide your training. When you don't measure anything, it often feels like you're not making progress, which makes it hard to stay consistent for long enough for all these adaptations that we've been talking about. Some of the most simple ways to test progress would be to simply measure distance for a broad jump, a triple broad jump, or a triple single leg hop. All this really requires is a tape measure. Now measuring jump height is a little bit more difficult. Personally, I use the OVR jump, which is a laser-based timing device that measures ground contact time and jump height. It's very similar to a timing mat, but much cheaper, and with the added benefit of being a lot more portable. I also like that you can set up the pieces 8 or 9 yards apart and get multiple contacts, for example, of a forward hop or a hurdle hop within that contact range. A lot of our viewers have jumped into training with OVR, and you can too, with $25 off of any OVR product with our affiliate link in the description below. All right, so overall, I hope this gives you some insight on how long different plyometric training adaptations take and the approach to training that you can use to create those adaptations to get the most out of your plyometrics. Hope you learned something today. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out our free Plyometrics Masterclass in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.